This was back in 2007 or 6 when I left Afghanistan because of the conflict, because of all the situation that we were faced with the war and growing up in a war zone. I had a good childhood. I mean, I lived with my grandparents in the mountains. There was some good memories. And then sadly, the war happened in 2001. And it's strange that we sit in 2024 and things are going full cycle. That's another story for another time maybe. But anyhow, so leaving home and being forced to flee, I was only about 12. My brother Hazrat was 13, 14. And then for our mother to send us away, at the time, I did not understood the implication, the seriousness of this, how long it will be. I thought we would be away for a few months or a few weeks or maybe a year or something. And
Your
then
mother was told a couple of weeks. That
yeah,
you'd
sure.
be in England in a few weeks.
Sure. I mean, not just that being in Europe or in England as such, but just I thought this situation would be resolved and we'll be back home. And later did I understood that it will take me over a year and I will be traveling around 10,000 miles or so and crossing many, many countries where I faced imprisonment and constant fear of being by authorities put me in prison and deported me back and forth. So, Iran, Turkey, Greece, all these countries that I went through and crossing the Mediterranean. Our boat was about to be capsized. So there's a lot of crazy experiences on the way. But I had to, and I was actually separated from my brother earlier on, so I was on my own, unaccompanied. I did meet other Afghans, made friends with them. They really helped me as a little brother, as a friend, to help me on this very challenging physical journey as well as an emotional journey. So it took over a year before I made it to the UK. But the UK wasn't really my destination as such. I would have stayed anywhere where I was welcomed or treated as a child or human being. In fact, the only place I felt treated as a child was Italy, where by then I knew my brother was in the UK, so I continued. Otherwise, I would be speaking Italiano now. And sadly, and actually, I never thought I'd write a book, and it's now published in 7 countries, in 7 languages, including Italiano and France and German and so on. But, I go to the UK, and that wasn't the end. I thought this would be the end of the journey or the experience, but after going through all the experiences, a near-death experience in the Mediterranean and being on top of lorry engine from Greece to Italy, and the smuggler treating us as a commodity and the authority treating us as criminals
Being
throughout the
forced
journey.
to stay in a chicken coop for days.
Mm-hmm.
Being so desperate that you decided to get into a refrigerated truck. Whether or not you survived, it was better than what you were living at that moment.
So we hear a lot about Calais. So when I go to Calais, I was warned by a lot of people about Calais, the jungle. By then I have experienced all sorts of inhumane conditions and a lot of hardships and difficulties. I thought, hopefully I'll manage this. I was so close, I could see England, but yet I was so far. And that experience really shattered me because I was there for a month until I wrote The Lightless Sky almost 9 years ago. I thought I was there for 3 months. That's how bad the conditions were. I wasn't really keeping time, what week and month and day, because there was no point to it. I did do it in the beginning, and then I realized there was no point knowing what day it was. What difference did it make? It didn't make no difference to me being in a basement or being somewhere in the mountains for days on end, or being in the back of a chicken coop and so on. But in Calais, I once burned my face with chemicals in the back of a truck. I've tried all sorts of dangerous. The smugglers put us in some dangerous places, but ultimately, that place. The police harassments, sometimes they would tear gas us, taking away our shoes and burning our blankets and tents, walking on ends almost every night to try to go to lorry car parks. And now I know, a few years ago, I know that the British taxpayer pay for that treatment of refugees in northern France. It's a place that should not exist.
And that's one of the things that really surprised me about Calais and your journey, your attempts to cross there, that I think lots of people don't know is, first of all, how many failed attempts you have to do to get lucky to get across. But secondly, how many times you get in a truck or manage to get away with the truck pulling out of the depot, and then you end up in some random place, and it takes you sometimes days to walk back, and the authorities may catch you, but very deliberately don't arrest you, so you're not fed, you're not put somewhere warm and safe to sleep, but you're forced to walk back, sometimes across borders, to get back to Calais.
Correct. So when I was in Calais, the police used to arrest us for no reason, and I was quite happy about that because I would go to the police cell, they'll give me a warm soup, I'll have some tea or coffee, and stay there for a few hours, and then I'll be walking back from the police station to the jungle. They'll arrest me again. I said, fine, this was life. I was very, very frustrating, and also the lorries, once I ended up going to Belgium and once going to Germany, you get in these lorries, you have no idea where they're going. The smugglers hopes it's going to England, and Yeah, I mean, this idea that France is safe. Yes, France may be safe. When I go back, I was actually there 2 weeks ago. It's very safe for me now as a citizen. And if you go there with a passport, it's a different matter. If you go there on holidays, it's a different thing. But when you are on the move, when you're a refugee, when you're an asylum seeker, it's a hell of an experience being in northern France. This jungle is a jungle. And right now, as you speak, there are thousands of children, women and men, and they're stranded, especially the winter is coming. And this issue needs to be resolved. I think it's shame for Britain, it's shame for France and Europe that this place exists. We treat animals, I mean, when you go there, we treat animals better than the way that people have been treated there. And the only fate, whenever I go, the only way I'm able to come back is because I got a piece of paper, I got a document, which they don't. And that's just it's just a matter of the nationality and the passport you hold. I could be the same guy stranded in Calais right now if I didn't have a passport. And that's just wrong.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm not saying we should take everyone, that would be nice, but I'm saying we should be taking our fair share, because this idea Britain is the furthest away. We want everyone, why, if you're a genuine refugee, to be staying in France. Well, France take 100,000 asylum applications a year. Of course, France could do more on discrimination, racism, and so on and so forth. Germany takes 700,000, 800,000 a year, or at least for asylum purposes. We have about 30,000 normally, and in recent years has risen to double that, 60 or 70,000. But we need to be playing our fair share. We can't expect France, Italy, or Greece, or Spain, or other countries to take on the burden when we are unwilling. Imagine if Britain was Greece. We would be saying completely the opposite of what we are saying.
I thought the other thing that really struck me was, you finally get out of the hellhole that is Calais, and you make it across to the UK. And suddenly, as a reader, I suddenly sort of exhale, he's made it, and you're still a child at this point. I think 13, 14, 13. And so you land on Britain's shores, somewhere here is your brother, which is what's brought you here. And then the authorities begin the process of asylum interviews or migration interviews. And at that point, they refuse to believe you're a child. And I mean, the gaslighting of this, 13-year-old having traversed the globe, now being given a random birthday and told this is when you were born. It's just unbelievable.
Again, I was grateful to Britain for giving me a place to stay and giving me food and clothes, but actually they were destroying me, and they were not believing the essence of my life. So after being in Kent and Dover for a few days, and then I was taken to Folkestone, to a social services offices, sitting around a table with 4, 5, 6 people, including the translator, for about 4 hours. They interviewed me, and I was giving them my date of birth, which is 11th of October. I was giving them all the information. They had my home office identification card in front of them. After 4 hours, not only did they insulted me, but they spelt my name wrong. I still have the papers with me. I'll show it to you later. They spelt my name wrong. They spelt my date of birth wrong. So instead of putting the 11th of the 10th, they put the 11th of the 11th. And they gave me a new date of birth, which was the 1st of May, 1991. They said to me, not 13, you were 16 and a half. You couldn't have traveled the world. Whatever you're telling us, that proves to us you could not be a child. And I said, well, I can't help with that. I've been street smart or so. But anyway, so this whole process was very dehumanizing. And that, little did I understood, it had such an impact on my legal status and my education. It literally had so many implications for me. I threw the paper at their faces. I said, this is not who I am. In fact, they were so careless that they could have said, okay, we'll accept the 11th of October, but not the 1994, but we'll make it 1991. That could have been, negotiable, which happened actually 3 years later. They did want to negotiate with me, saying, well, we'll accept the day and the month, but not the year. It was a crazy experience. And the sad thing is, what happened to me is not unique. It's happening to almost every Afghan young person who arrives in Kent. The social services in the Home Office disputes people's age. They start with the premise you're lying. And so when your age is disbelieved, and then actually the Home Office then disputed my nationality. Not only the social services didn't believe I was 13, then Home Office didn't believe I was from Afghanistan. And then they give me a 1-year leave to remain because I was an unaccompanied minor till I'm 17 and a half. And then they threatened to deport me twice. And where they were deporting me to? Afghanistan. And I said, let's first sort out who am I, and let's sort out my age, and then we'll discuss my nationality, and then you can deport me. I said, for the purpose of deportation, I'm Afghan, but for the purpose of protection, I'm not Afghan. This whole thing was really bizarre. And so it took me a long time before I was able to challenge it with the help of lots of people, teachers, youth workers, supporters. And the thing that upsets me is that what has happened to me is happening to so many people. Almost half of young people in Kent are age disputed.
Really shocking. And Jaz, you had a very, very different childhood growing up in London, but events took you to the jungle in Calais too, for very different reasons. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, definitely. I love listening to your story again. It reminds me of when I was reading your book, and there was a bit at the beginning where Gulwali describes life in Afghanistan, and I remembered that your grandma was a midwife, which made me feel better, because if I spontaneously go into labour, then Gulwali knows what to do, because you'd go with her and have to listen in the other room when you were little. I remember that vision of young Gulwali. But yeah, absolutely. So I also had a very different journey that took me to Calais. And so many of the things that Gulwali talks about are very close to home to me in a different way. I have an Afghan foster brother. I grew up in Kent. And he had his age disputed, his story disputed, his asylum denied, even though he'd lived with my family for years. He'd been going to college, he'd been studying. But anyway, I'll start a little bit more from the beginning and introduce myself. So I'm a podcaster and a writer focusing on migration and displacement. And this journey started for me in 2015, so nearly 10 years ago. And that's sad to recognize, because the rhetoric and the narrative around migration has not changed that much. It certainly hasn't got better in the last 10 years. Guys, I'm so pregnant, this is why I'm out of breath.
Take it slow.
I need to talk slower. So, 2015, if you guys can cast your mind back to the kind of rhetoric that we were hearing, swarms of migrants coming from the Calais jungle. It was the same year that my youngest biological brother was turning 18. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it all makes sense in the end. But my mum and dad in Kent were having a classic case of empty nest syndrome. And they had always had a big family at home. I'm the oldest of 4. And when my youngest brother was kind of looking at options to move out, they realized that this kind of big dinner table experience of people coming and going in our house was going to change. Ironically, it's busier than ever right now, because they started looking into their options for fostering or adoption. And what they came to learn was that there were many unaccompanied minors, or I say many, actually not that many in terms of globally, but there was a need for foster parents for young children like Gulwali who were arriving to the shores of Kent, Dover and Folkestone. And they needed families, that a lot of them had come without their families, that had lost families along the way, and that they were alone from the age of the youngest unaccompanied minor I ever met was 7. So my mum and dad started looking into this option, and it took them 9 months to become registered foster parents. And in that time, little did they know that on the other side of the world, there was a boy making his own 9-month journey, and his name is Mez, and he became my first foster brother. He's from Eritrea. He, similarly to Gulwali, crossed the Mediterranean, crossed the Sahara Desert, lived in the Calais jungle until he hid underneath the Eurotunnel train to make it to the UK when he was 12. He was fleeing compulsory military service in Eritrea. And him joining my family when he was 12, and 10 years ago now, changed the course of all of our lives in my family. It opened our eyes to the journeys that people like Gulwali and Mez are taking, and that they are not unique. And not just that, then the asylum system that he had to navigate. So even though he had a family, he had a home in the UK, he had support, he had a network, he started going to school, he went on to do his GCSEs and learn English, and he still had to navigate his immigration status, which has been something that's been hanging over his head for the last 10 years still. He just got his British citizenship recently, and I think it took you 15 years. And I think this is something that a lot of people, maybe including me, didn't realize, that in arriving to the UK, that is definitely not the end of the story and not the end of the journey. So anyway, I could talk about this for a long time, but he's the first of 4 foster brothers that I have from Eritrea, Sudan, Libya, and Afghanistan. And it was Gulwali's book that actually we passed around my whole family. We've got a copy right here. That really changed the way that we understood my Afghan brother's experience when he first arrived, when he didn't speak English, and we needed that insight into the journey that he might have taken. It was your story that gave us that, and it was a very helpful and a very beautiful, powerful story.